Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this roundtable talk with June Edmonds, Yrneh Gabon, CCH Pounder, and Dr. Anita Bateman. I'm going to keep this intro brief so that we can spend as much time as possible in the conversation. To that end, I won't be reading the introductions for June or Yrneh, but you can find their bios right on their exhibition page on our website, as well as at the front desk here at the gallery. And of course, their beautiful exhibitions will be on view for 2 more weeks, and I encourage you, everyone, to see them if you can. I do want to welcome our 4 guest speakers and thank them for taking time out of their busy schedules for this event. Yrneh is actually joining us from Botswana, where it's very late in the evening. I do want also please feel free to post your questions in the Zoom message board, and we'll try to get to them during the Q&A. CCH Pounder is a Guyanese-born artist and actress. In a career spanning 45 years, she has brought to life innumerable iconic characters, too many to name here, in theater, film, television, animation, and video games that have earned her numerous awards, including 4 Emmy nominations. Currently, you can see her in the new Netflix hit series, 3 Body Problem, which is terrific, by the way. A lifelong advocate of the arts, CCH is active in the Creative Coalition, and recent accolades include the Visionary Leadership Award in Performing Arts from the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco, the 2018 Bob Marley Award from the American Foundation for the University of the West Indies, the National Urban League's 2017 Women of Power Award, the 2016 Sweet Arts Performing Arts Honoree from the Contemporary Arts Center in New Orleans, and the 2015 honoree at the Grand Performances Gala in Los Angeles. She's also been extensively involved in the arts as a patron, a collector, gallery owner, and museum founder. Pounder's own collection contains over 500 works of art by contemporary Caribbean and African artists and artists of the African diaspora. She also collects traditional African sculptures. In 1992, Pounder and her husband, the late Boubacar Kane, founded and built the Musée Boribana, the first privately owned contemporary museum in Dakar, Senegal, which they gifted to that nation in 2014. In 2022, she was named a Commander of the National Order of the Lion, the highest order awarded by the government of Senegal. Our moderator, Dr. Anita Bateman, specializes in modern and contemporary African art and the art of the African diaspora, with additional expertise in the history of photography, Black feminism, womanism, and the role of social media in activism and liberation work. Dr. Bateman earned a doctorate in art history and visual culture and a graduate certificate in African and African American studies from Duke University, a master's in art history from Duke University, and completed her undergraduate degree in art history, graduating cum laude from Williams College. She has held curatorial positions at the Risley Museum, the Williams College Museum of Art, and the Nasher Museum of Art. Her academic research has been supported by the American Council of Learned Societies, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, the Woodrow Wilson National Fellowship Foundation, and the Social Science Research Council. Dr. Bateman was the Fall 2022 ARC Athens Curatorial Fellow and a 2022 Graham Foundation grantee for the forthcoming publication, Where is Africa, by the Center for Art, Research and Alliances, and co-edited with Emmanuel Admasu. She is currently the Associate Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. It's all yours, Dr. Bateman.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you all for joining. In particular, thank you to our incomparable panelists and Luis de Jesus Gallery. I have the pleasure of being in conversation with these 3 esteemed panelists today. And I just want to take one note that Luis said at the beginning, that we'll ask for questions to be put in the chat. We'll leave about 15 minutes at the end of the conversation for participants to then ask their questions directly via the chat to our 3 artists, panelists. And without further ado, I would like to start with June Edmonds. So June, we know that you have 2 prominent series, the energy wheel paintings, which are inspired by your meditation practice, as well as your flag paintings, which explore the alignment of multiple identities such as race, nationality, gender, and political sort of inclinations. And the Meditations on African Resilience exhibition, which is your third solo exhibition with the gallery, is taking your work in a new direction and expanding it. It's thinking about sacred geometries like the Vesica Pisces and Adinkra symbols of West Africa. You're very much in this body of work now inspired by Benin plaques or bronze plaques from the 15th to 16th century. And so I wonder if you might offer thoughts about how the current show, Meditations on African Resilience, is in dialogue with previous exhibitions at the gallery, and also how you transition into thinking about the bronze plaques.
Okay. So the first show that I had at the gallery was my show with my flags. And so what I was contemplating with those flags was individuals or African-American individuals that really showed a commitment to democracy in a way I feel that is unmatched by other Americans. And particularly an American that might wear a lapel that has a flag on it to signify something. So those flags were signifying another thing, which is, again, that commitment to democracy. These paintings here ask the question, what is it in the souls of Black folks that are able to have the resilience to believe in that democracy and to have us really sort of succeed, and thrive in this culture, okay? And so I asked that question and suspect that part of the answer sort of lies in sort of a connection I felt that I've had that I'm sure I share with the art of Benin, right? And so we could look at that art. We looked at that art years ago and saw ourselves in the faces. And very recently I looked at it and saw these symbols in the background that we could see with this wonderful example that's put up. That to me was communicating something to me. And so very strongly. And so I sort of researched that and saw that it was a symbol of that was defining strength and resilience. And so that's sort of how I got to where I am now.
Mm-hmm. And formalistically, do you remember the moment in interpreting specifically the river leaf, which is an element in the Benin plaques, about seeing that and just understanding immediately that that would be a new direction for you? Talk to us about that.
I knew that there was something about this, right? And I also recognized sort of immediately that sort of this Vesica Pisces form. And before I go on, the Vesica Pisces form is sort of that overlap area between the two circles, and it's sort of an ovoid shape. So when you look at the river leaf, there's 4 of them that are coming together and sort of the circle that's in the middle. So I knew I was connecting to those as well. And so it took, I experimented with that and sort of delved into that, and later sort of came up with sort of, these are inspired by that form, first of all, I should say, and sort of came up with sort of figuring out that these also are places where those circles that I was working with in the first place are in fact overlapping. And it would just be interesting to sort of delve into that visually.
I like to hold the opportunity to connect the idea of circles and also the presence of water that is very much present in your work as well as in Yrneh's work. But just to give a sense of a grander picture, I was researching specifically, June's trajectory to artistic practice. And I recall there was an instance where you were saying that your mother had this very strong impact on the decision for you to be an artist. And you then also went to the 2 Centuries of Black American Art exhibition, which was curated by David Driscoll. And that also had a very impactful presence in your choice to go to art school. So I wonder if Yrneh and CCH, if you might also talk about or recount the moments that you knew you wanted to be artists. And June, please feel free to add context to what was offered about the exhibitions that really made you set upon this path.
Yrneh, go ahead.
Okay, so I've always known I wanted to be working in the creative industry all my life. I think the first time when it really hit me that I wanted to use art as a language, it was when I opened the Bible and I would see how the pictures are depicted, how dramatic and theatrical they were. And I would just, I was probably about 4 or 5. I would just keep turning the page and just looking at it. And I think the first time I remember drawing, it was drawing a fish using the number 8. And in one of the areas of the 8, I'd put an I. That was kind of my first drawing. But the first time I knew I wanted to be an artist and tell a story, it was as a little boy, no more than 6 or 7, looking in the Bible and then finding that was a safe place for me to really express myself and express my emotion.
Oh, sorry, Yrneh, I didn't realize you'd finished. I thought you were going to tell the story of the room that had all of the magazine tears out, which is such a marvelous story of laying in bed and the walls of the house were covered with magazines like a wallpaper, and to watch all these images be assaulted by them, I thought was certainly the story that you had to share. Mine's a very simple one. I've always had a huge fight between being a visual artist and being a theatrical artist. And I had a marvelous mentor, Stella Curran, who I often mention. She said, to be an artist, visual artist, as long as you have your hands and your eyes, you will always be able to do something. And what you want to do for acting, it's sort of like for young people. And I literally took that to heart. I decided that the first half of my life, I would be an actor, and the second half, I would be an artist, which is completely insane. Nothing ever happens like that. However, by becoming an actor first, it allowed me to introduce artists to actors who tend to have a little bit more dosh than a visual artist would. And I sort of created this community of constantly introducing various artists, writers, actors, musicians, and visual artists, letting them meet each other. And that's pretty much how I started, very innocently, and how it's grown into this sort of magnificent thing that I do now of collecting and showing the work in public through museums and other art centers.
And June, I just gave the Cliff Notes version, so I would love for you to hear.
I will just say, yes, I think my mom and another generation would have been an artist. I think, and that's where I got lots of inspiration from. My mom would take us to museums. And so we did have experience going to museums where all the artists were white. And then finally, we did go to the David Driscoll curated 2 Centuries of Black American Art. And that just changed everything, seeing myself, my family, people that were very familiar to me in paintings, just changed everything.
Just to maybe hinge between two thoughts, thinking about June's work, which is on screen in the translation of these sacred symbologies like the Vesica Pisces, but also Yrneh's experience of having that moment where you were engaging with the Bible. There is this conflation, it seems, amongst all three of your practices of the sort of presence of African spirituality, of course. And from the book about CC's collection, there's this very poignant quote where Sarah Anita Clunas says, "We are clearly living in the Black Baroque, a counter-reformation, if you will, of a revival of the African sacred and contemporary African diasporic art." And that's a brilliant quote because I think it really encapsulates not only a CCH's collection and the priorities that we see when we see sort of the entire collection, but also the particularities that then are literally seen across both of these exhibitions, which share space in Luis's gallery. And so I wonder if you all might sort of think with me about this idea about revivalism, if that's actually something that we're seeing or maybe needs to be cogitated on a little bit more. And what maybe special considerations you think about when translating the intangible to tangible form regarding spirituality, religion, and transcendental experiences in general.
Well, I know I happen to be in a really unique position because I'm in New Orleans and just recently saw or witnessed the performances of the Mardi Gras Indians. I am sitting straight upright because I also fell in Trinidad while attending Carnival there. And I think the most spiritual part of that carnival was not the what I call dental floss and feathers of the big shows, but in the villages where that mix of the carnal and the spiritual come together in these celebrations of allowing a kind of freedom to express yourself in dance and sound is very apparent. So that's right at the back of my brain when I look at works like these that include spirit in a sort of visceral, peripheral way around the characters that Yrneh is painting. And I'm so glad that June talked about the kernel of what her paintings mean, because I think when you go in and you're not familiar with abstract art and you don't get all the information right away, I can actually now see a symbol of the African fan and on those very images that they have that I have in my collection. And it's like, wow, there it is. And so I've just been awakened to that look of there it is. That's what she's talking about in abstract. And I have to tell you, I'm a novice in the abstract world, but to be able to connect to it so quickly is a wonderful thing. And I thank you for that.
Awesome.
Yrneh, June, any additional thoughts you may want to offer?
For me, the connection with spirituality runs incredibly deep because of just where I come from in the West Indies and how I first got into allowing my creative spirit to settle or to mediate dialogue when it comes to telling stories. I see it all the time, but I think what stands out for me more than anything else is the continuation through neocolonialism and how that is literally woven together and move from generation to generation, not only in the US, but throughout Africa and the diaspora and still has a leg that is in just about every places. Recently, I went into a village here in Botswana, and it was with some Khoisan people. And we were in a place where, you know, the houses are different. They are traditional houses. And there was a church. And inside the church, there were these native people, and they were making jewelry. And I thought to myself, bingo, here it is. We're in Tanzania, where I first went, where the church was built on the dungeon. In Senegal, where it's not too far from Gorée. In Ghana, in Elmina, in Cape Coast, where the church is always involved and closely connected to things that are questionable. Allow me to continually to dig and deconstruct, to find answers. And it always come back to the same thing, where religion is one of the most, in particular Christianity, because I can speak more in Christianity because that's what I look a lot into for answers based on my cultural and heritage. There's a lot of questionable things and situation within history that still needs to be brought to the table and to have a discussion and some kind of a reckoning, because I don't see it. What I see is more of it. So I feel what this has been doing for me and will continue to is allow me to continue to make work that in just each body you will see the quest, trying to understand why the whys as to how we get where we are, and why the continuation when, you know, I mean, personally, for me, I just think that there's a lot of damage done, and there's some people who don't get it, but that's okay. I just feel strongly that religion is one of those things that we constantly have to pay attention to and have dialogue about moving forward, because the seriousness of it. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I feel strongly that that's my take on the reason you see a lot of these symbolism and a lot of these tropes that speaks to Christianity in my work.
And just staying on the topic of tropes formalistically and more conceptually, in your work, Yrneh, in specific pieces, we see that there's a repetition of form. And specifically, I'm thinking of the Rise piece. We see that there are 4 tiers. And across the show, the element of 4 keeps repeating. There are 4 bobos, there are 4 compositions centered on the theme of identity. And then there are 4, I believe, paintings of children that you encountered on the continent that you're also then giving a sort of visual narrative to. And June, earlier you talked about 4 as a sort of an organizing principle related to the river leaf. And I wonder if you might both sort of, you know, maybe talk about if that was an intentional like translation of this sort of spiritual practice of downloading that you are engaging in as you're thinking about the work, or if that was completely sort of happenstance and you both were thinking about numerology quite, you know, quite as sort of like a coincidence.
Yeah.
June, you want to go first?
Yeah. So it's happenstance. To answer your question, you know, there's not a reason that that I connected to sort of the 4 petals of the river leaf. But I am super fascinated and super thrilled and happy about the connections that we're finding in our work, right? And Yrneh and I recently have talked about it. And so one of the things also I find sort of fascinating about the connection between our work is sort of the symbol that is pervasive in my work and the symbol that's pervasive in his work, and how those forms sort of relate to each other. Because the dragonfly, in my opinion, also sort of has these 4 points as well. So it's really interesting to hear, Dr. Bateman, what you are seeing about the 4. I really appreciate that.
This is numerology for me is something that I latched onto in 2018 when CCH and I had a conversation about making a particular work. And I start really paying great attention to numbers. So there's 4, there's 3, there's 55, there is 7, there is odd, and sometimes they're even. The 4 for me symbolizes the 4 corners or the 4 winds. You talk about rise. There are, I think there are 4 pearls, teardrops on that as well. And the 5 are the five countries that were the countries that enslaved Africa, the transatlantic slavery. There were 5 main countries that came out of the 1834-1835 Berlin Conference. Angel with roots. There are numbers, numerology is very much woven in that piece as well. All the countries that were at the Berlin Congo Conference is carried on the head, and you see them today in Africa, still mining her, still taking from her, still see her as a source, still building. And then you go to rise, and the inside the piece actually is the water from Gorée, which is taken from, of course, you see the blue eye. And then the 5 figures that represents those spirits that are standing against and still is the 5 countries that literally were leaders in the colonization and the Atlantic slave trade. If you notice at the top, there's 3. The 3 is on the rise piece, the 3 figure is the mother, the father, and the child. The child, the mother, father, and child. Usually back then in the auction block, you were just a thing. So a child, there's no boy, girl, it's you just go and you're sold, man, woman, the same thing. And you're having those spirits coming out in number. The singular dragonfly that is leaving, ascending to the sky, for me, the number 1. So 1 with everything becomes a odd number, right? So numerology for me has now become something that I seriously and consciously think about when I'm working in any kind of my work moving forward. There's 55, I think there's one that has 55 dragonflies in them with the children. There are 55 countries, including the newly recent Southern Sudan. And 54 countries and now 55 with Sudan. So I'm very much aware of what numerology does in the work. If you look at the black eclipse and sunshine Afro blues, you have the 11th, the 12th hour, and you have the one in the piece, the middle, the center, the 13 pieces makes it an odd, because one mentor not recently, but told me a while ago that life was odd, and it really is. So wherever there is even, there is odd. And I do play around a lot with numerology in the work. The 4 again appears in They Came, the 4 corners of the earth, the 4 winds, the east, west, the north, and the south is covered.
And sort of thinking, moving through those ideas around the intangible based in numerology, I'm wondering if we can now ground inquiry in what is concrete for you both. And so you're both very much, Yrneh and June, in dialogue with history and erasures, or the silences of the archive, as Tina Kemp might say. And so I wonder, in now thinking about the groundedness or the concretization of facts, could you talk about how you initiate the research process and then how you decide about choosing which narratives become art, thinking about historical inquiry and also what you've previously mentioned about spirituality.
Okay, I'll go. Usually for me, I have what we call, my practice is it's very much like if it's a feelings and facts. So I feel something, yeah, it's like a call and a response, and then I get into the research process. If I'm looking at, not if, but when I'm looking at, say I'm looking at slavery and I'm looking at the Atlantic slave trade, I have been looking at this since 2016. I've been to the Museum of Liverpool. I've been to France, I've been to Portugal, I've been to London. I'm looking at objects, I'm looking at history, I'm going through libraries, I'm looking at archives, and I am thinking about numbers. I am thinking about numbers. Material itself doesn't come until the research is to the boiling point where it starts really gurgitating information to me. And when that happens, that's when I really start paying attention to what the forms are going to be and what the materials are going to be. Most of the work within the last, I say since 2016, has been very much leaning a lot towards delving into the language and the aesthetics of spirituality to allow me to deconstruct what history has given to me and what I'm now discovering by being the person who is the miner, mining history in a point to where I am actually excavating where the bodies are. I go to those actual places where information are hidden in some book, someplace, and when you open it, you're seeing first an account of stuff, right? And then that becomes the actual information. Those findings become the findings that I start really, marinating. And within that time, numbers and numerology doesn't really jump in until I start really, because of course, if you look at history, it deals with numbers, right? It deals with numbers in terms of date and years and era and all that kind of stuff. So we are already woven and really trained to think historically how we are going to have the dates to match the facts, right? So for me, that is going to come. And when that starts really pouring itself out into the actual work, then I start really deciding aesthetically where stuff is going to place in terms of the actual work.
Thank you. And for June, I'm thinking specifically about how your energy paintings have been sort of couched within these terms of being sort of these transcendental meditations. But then when we look at your titles, we're also getting information about what you're looking at. So for instance, Caravan, which is not in this particular show, has a resonance that is related to an abolitionist practice, it seems, but also Story of the Ohio for Margaret is thinking about histories of enslavement and a particular narrative about an enslaved woman that Toni Morrison also then talks about in the Beloved novel. So when you're thinking about the archive and engaging with histories, how does that sort of translation process happen for you?
Well, for me, the entry point is more of a standpoint of a abstract painter, and so abstraction painting in general has always been fascinating to me, of how deep and communicative and spiritual it can be. And so for me, the question is, how is that so, and why is that so? So for instance, with the river leaf, it's like communicating with me on this really sort of deep and mysterious level. It's connecting to something that I can't say I am completely consciously familiar with. And that's super fascinating. And I want to recreate that. And I want to use the tools that I have to recreate that. And so research is important for me to sort of understand, what these symbols are, but I think the symbols, the color, the repetition, I think those things are so powerful that most of the time that I am creating these things, I'm in that space, experimenting with those things and sort of testing those things to create something that works, that communicates in that on that level, on that very mysterious level.
And thinking about, you mentioned sort of the experimentation of materials and color, just to stay with you for a bit, June. Can you talk about some of those considerations that you're thinking through, for instance, in choosing a particular color palette for a work, or using, canvas versus linen, which we see you do within this show, in terms of having that experimentation happen?
Yeah, as I think back as I think back on the sort of initial interest to even delve into art making that communicates in this way, I do think of artwork that does. People clearly see my connection to Alma Thomas. I remember seeing her work, in the 2 Centuries exhibition, and it stayed in my psyche for such a long time. So I think that there is something very sacred about the circle, but I think that you could say that about a rectangle as well. I think that sort of gender associations exist, when it comes to shape, and that's a whole nother subject that I will leave alone. But I don't create symbols in my color. I think that doesn't work for me. A blue might have a very similar resonance than that a pink would for me, for instance. So they're not really symbolic. I am interested in sort of putting colors together in different and new ways. That's sort of what I'm looking for, that might communicate something in a different way.
And I just asked June something. I knew that before this abstract work, you did figurative work, and yet within the figurative work, there's a great deal of patterning and colors. And I just wondered, did it not offer you enough space to interpret what you were thinking or feeling, or how did this transition to abstraction happen?
Thank you so much for that question, CCH. I think that is true. I think about the first abstractions that I had done, and they were actually like in black and white. And I was really trying to communicate sort of emotion with those, and then I sort of transitioned into color. But when one looks back at those figurative pieces and looks at the patterns, because I was always interested in pattern, an African pattern from the beginning, and color and using it in a certain way, I think that sort of the figures and the figuration did get smaller and smaller in my concerns. So yes. Mm-hmm.
Thinking about that in sort of a number of essays and in literature relating to June's work, there's sort of a relationship that authors are drawing attention to regarding Black women's experiences and Black female subjectivities, if not actual bodies. And sort of to jump around in this question, I recall when I was starting to think about CCH's practice, there was a comment that your late husband made about you collecting primarily works depicting Black women, and that something akin to he only had the one wife. And so that's an interesting sort of linchpin, because not only do we have June's sort of thinking about Black female subjectivity, and then you're collecting work by and depictions of Black women, but Yrneh is also thinking about the representation of women and the importance of women across the continent, for instance, in his Dear Mama work. And so I wonder if you all might think your work somehow engages or is in dialogue with Black feminist praxis, or maybe just talk to us about that sort of concept in how you approach your art and your interests.
I wish I could say that mine was from an intellectual place, but it wasn't. Mine is a visceral desire to have that image on my wall. Not because I never saw that before, which I didn't see. In my growing up, there was no art on the walls, none whatsoever. There was just a collection of ebony pieces that my father had from Kenya. And I used to use the smallest piece, a little sort of king head, as my good luck charm when I go to auditions and stuff. Nothing related in any way. But when I did start to collect, my attraction was to the Black female. And it hasn't changed. The only things that I collect now, I collect it with purpose to balance the collection now in a very sort of purposeful way. But still, it takes a great deal to steer me away in a room, to steer me away from that female. I just understand them. In just looking at them, I understand something, I feel something, I already know something, and sometimes it is purely spiritual or emotional.
Yeah.
Look at that.
I love it.
Fantastic. That's Jean Pearson. Marvelous.
What about you? You also have a relationship, as I mentioned, to female figures in your work throughout, not only in Dear Mama, but we see repetitions of, female sort of celestial figures and whatnot. What is that sort of translation process for you?
So this is quite interesting because really and truly, I think now looking back, I remember when I first saw figures in any form outside of Bible, and it was in that room. CC was telling the story. I have to really just give a little part of it. I went to the country when I was very little, may have been 6 or 7 years old or 8, somewhere there. And my step grandmother had a room, and it was her room, like her place, separate from my grandfather's room. And all the walls were, she would tear the magazine because they didn't paint the houses. And the magazines were all European figures, and they would be pasted up on the wall. And I would see these people, and they were all looking so polished, so dressed, everything was different. And I would stare and wonder and stare and wonder. And then when I go into the community, the women that I saw that moved me to a place of emotion were the villagers, and they were voluptuous, they were different sizes, the expressions were chiseled, the skins were dark, the eyes were piercing. Everything for me was just pure art. So when I decided to really start expressing myself and telling stories, I really went to those places, those women that spoke to me. And it's not only the women, but the girls. There's a saying that every tree was once a seed, and you can see sometimes where the tree will go based on the seed, right? So that spoke to me and still speaks to me that the woman is the village. Women is in all of my work. There's not a body of work that I've made or created, whether it's poems, whether it's visual performance, there's always women in the work, because I feel like women is the village and the cornerstone of humanity in so many ways. So you will always see women in my work. And the figures you're looking at right now, I feel very strongly the real strong melanin that you're looking at. It's because I really want to remind those of us who feel so differently about the melanin to really look and see a beauty beyond what they think they're seeing of themselves. So I am not a woman in the least, but I am so surrounded and so supported by women that I continue to feel the need, the honest need to tell stories in this way.
Mhm. And when I first started painting, I was a figurative painter. And, just a couple years after seeing my own image, my grandmother in paintings in a museum, as we mentioned before, I saw this huge opening to paint people that looked like me. And at the time, I was a 19-year-old Black girl, and I was painting my friends. And it was just such a wonderful experience to sort of, I felt like I was sort of contributing to something then that didn't exist. And it really didn't back then. And so when I look back at those paintings, they were all of my friends. They were all young women, you know. And so more recently, sort of a body of work that I started in 2020 was inspired actually by a public art project that I had gone out for, and it was to take place in Beverly Hills. And I just wanted to know, I started that public art proposal in the way I always do, and that is, what is the history of this neighborhood? And so the neighborhood was Beverly Hills. And I should say, my question was, what is the Black history? Because you usually find something, because that's the history that's always buried, that people don't talk about. So lo and behold, I found the history, and that is that the first uh, person that settled in Beverly Hills was a Afro-Latina by the name of Maria Valdez, and she was a grandchild of one of the pobladors. And so that sort of set me off to create a body of work that were about these Black women pioneers. And so that's when I did a body of work that was really focusing on that Vesica pieces, which is that ovoid, and these really broad sort of what I call migration paths, sort of celebrating the strength of these women pioneers.
Thank you so much. I have
I
one.
just want to say one more quick thing about on the topic of women in Dear Mama. If you go back to that image in Dear Mama, if you look at Dear Mama as you're looking at her now, according to history and Lucy, it starts with the Black woman, and it is still the Black woman. And both ends you will see women, African women, and in the middle you will see a variation of different women in this particular piece. So the focus is always there for me of what historically the story I want to tell. And even though the focus is around the Black woman, women in general, I always feel has a lot of leverage when it comes to what it means to be village, and what it means to really carry on a generation. So I just wanted to make that very clear. And in Dear Mama, you can see it.
Thank you. And while we're here on Dear Mama and Yrneh, could you tell us who are the women you're actually depicting? Are they subjects from history, community members, other artists? There are faces. Let's see.
In the middle, it's interesting because there is to your left, there's a figure of a woman looking out with her eyes closed, and that is a photograph of a woman I took in Kenya, not Kenya, in Tanzania on my trip there, bring her into this work. And then I wanted to look at Africa through the lens of where I thought that it would have been going. And you see the Asian woman, there's a lot of Asian now in Africa, a lot of Chinese here doing business and looking at different things. You're seeing that. And even though I don't see enough women, I see men, but these men came from women. So pretty soon you're going to see some of that, right? And then in the middle, there is the Caucasian woman. And for me, the Caucasian woman in the middle is representing all those men and the colonizers that comes to Africa and is still here, literally seeing Africa as the center of their universe outside of Africa. You know, the Europe, the Americas, all the countries that were part of that original slicing up of Africa, hence their mama is all those cutting up, and the hemorrhaging that you're seeing of the piece in blood. And then, of course, at one point I was working with albinism, so you see the woman with a different, the albino woman, a piece of her enter in the piece, and it goes back to another woman. So that is actually from just a found image that is able to put into the work. And inside there are other women. So I really wanted to fuse the piece with women that I thought represented the different races that we are talking about in more ways than one, that would have said, okay, fine, this is an art to what it really is. So that's pretty much it.
Thank you. I have actually one final question. I don't know if I should ask it or if we should take the opportunity to take questions from participants. I'm checking the chat and there doesn't seem to be any, so I feel inclined to just ask this final question. So this is actually for CCH, and given your interdisciplinary identity, you're a collector, you're an arts patron, you're a gallerist, you're an artist, and I wonder if you could talk specifically to the first two identities, if you will. So what might be the best advice you can give those looking to start their art collection? And from the other side, how do you see your role as a collector in supporting artists? What sort of initiatives or interpersonal dynamics do you think makes for a good relationship when you're trying to support artists specifically?
It's a terrific question, and I would give this information to a young actress as well. Start at home. So I collected from the people around me in my, I was living in a loft. We would have not much money, but we'd pull together our resources and have a big dinner. At the big dinner, we would always give out a prize of a piece of art. And that was collecting without paying. But then it got you into the habit of, I really like that artist's work. I will save up to get that. And when you're doing the beginning, you can do trading, but invest in somebody that you love in your neighborhood, in your area, in your town, and follow that person. I think Yrneh can attest to, I've known him for many, many years, and loved some work, hated others, but I kept with him, and he had moments of like, wow, you've made a leap here. And it's exciting for the collector to see the leaps in the artists that happen. So that, I think, is the easiest thing to do, is to just start in your town. I know now the internet is also our town in this oddest of ways. So there's collecting like that, but you don't necessarily get to know the artist. And I think when you get to know the artist, then you start to have a passion for where they're going, and that becomes really important. And then as a collector, this is what changes. I've collected so much that I truly did not want to have this fantastic collection in my basement. You don't have enough to go on the wall. I mean, there's too much to go on the walls. I collected specifically art of the African diaspora, and I knew that when I was growing up, I never saw such a thing. I never saw images like these. So I made it a huge effort to contact museums, contact art centers, if they would like to partner with me in showing the works that I've collected. It's just incredible timing on my part that Black images, Black artists, and the diaspora are now taking up their own arms and alms and paying for the work, supporting the work, collecting the work, and others are saying, wait a minute, there seems to be money to be had over there. And they are also, as art lovers, are now expanding their horizons of what art can be, who else makes it. And this to me is probably the most exciting time, where the work that I have is not going to be in vain, that it's not going to be stuck in a closet for my grandchild to kind of go, oh, well, I was never really into art. It's now gets to be part of the public domain. So I'm really happy about that. I have lost you.
No, you're here.
There we go.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, good. I was saying that the public appreciates your sharing, I'm sure. And we also appreciate both June and Yrneh sharing a little bit about their artistic practice in the works and the current shows up. I just want to pass it back to Louise for final words in terms of telling us when the shows, or how long the shows are up, and how we can further support not only June and Yrneh, but also the gallery. But thank you all for attending and for your attention, and I hope you enjoy Good Friday.
What it is.
So, well, thank you again, all of you. It's just really special to listen to you speak of your personal history with art, with your relationship to Africa and your friendship with each other. I think it's phenomenal. I love what CCH said at the very end about getting to know your community, your artistic community. It doesn't all happen on the internet or on Instagram. So about just getting out there and seeing who's doing and investing in your community. That's what I tell also people who ask me about collecting. I say, start in your local community. Go to your schools, go to your colleges, your community college, buy from them, because they're looking for encouragement and they need your support. That's what's going to elevate them, and their career will take off. But it's really starting at that lower level like that. It's not even a lower level. It's really just a different level. And you can, it's really, it's a worthwhile, but also very satisfying, I think. That's all my 2 cents there. Anyways, thank you so much, all of you. It's been really wonderful. Thank you everyone out there in our audience as well. We have 2 more weeks remaining for these 2 shows. They'll be up. So I encourage you, if you're here in LA or passing through, please drop by, take a look for yourself. The work is really phenomenal. I mean, it's really just beautiful, beautiful work. And it's one thing to see an image on a screen, but it's another one to really experience it and have the work communicate back to you, because that's the real experience of art, isn't it? You can stand in front of something and just be quiet and the work will speak back to you. So thank you again. I don't think there's anything else, right? Are you guys all satisfied?
Again, many thanks to participants and Louise and Yrneh as well. We appreciate your attendance, and for more information, you can check out Louise's gallery's website and also the artist's website to continue to support them. Thank you.
Personally, thank you as well to everyone who was able to make this possible at the gallery, June and Anita and Cici. Cici, thank you so much for being a part of all the journey, and also for telling that story. It reminded me that there are stories that still left to be told. Thank you all from Botswana.
Thank you.
Thank you.